Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think that we have still a few people in the waiting room. So I think all of us are now present. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Veronica Corpadel. I'm co-coordinating the Nova Refugee Clinic with Francisco, who is also with us today. So we'll just say a few introductory words before moving forward with the presentations in today's webinar on migration, clinical, legal education and research in pandemic times. Francisco, do you want to say a few introductory words?
Very quickly, because we have a busy schedule for today. So my name is Francisco Coutinho. I'm a professor at Nova School of Law and also the Vice Dean for Internationalization. And it's really a pleasure to be here in this webinar on clinical legal education, migration clinical legal education, because I'm co-coordinating, as Veronica said, the Nova Refugee Clinic, which is a project that we started a few years ago, but you'll hear more about that by Emily Oliveira. So thank you so much for being here with us. Today is a national holiday in Portugal, so I see a lot of known names. So thank you so much for being here with us. So I hope we'll have a fruitful discussion about this very important topic for us. So thank you, Veronica, and you have the floor to present our guests today.
Thank you, Francisco. So again, good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our invited presenters. So I have only recently joined the Nova School of Law, where I'm co-coordinating the Nova Refugee Clinic and also teaching European migration and asylum law. So basically, the impetus of this webinar comes from the felt need to sort of take stock of how the pandemic has affected clinical legal education and research, not only because of the sudden shift to digital platforms, of course, but also because the COVID crisis affected almost all aspects of social life, including, of course, that of migrants, and it shaped migration governance. So clinics presumably also had to deal with new contexts and issues. So here we will be focusing specifically on how migration clinical legal education has been experienced in France, Italy, and Portugal. And among the issues specific to the pandemic, I'm thinking, of course, about the challenges of social distancing in spaces in which migrants live or are detained, these spaces being often overcrowded, but also about the emergence of new spaces such as quarantine ships used, for instance, by Italian and Maltese authorities. So this is just a few aspects that have changed that the pandemic has brought. I mean, but also the way in which authorities responded to the pandemic, but also, of course, another important aspect of what has been and is migrants' access to healthcare services and vaccination rollout programs. So we'll start today's webinar with Ulrich Stage. We have 4 presenters and about 15 minutes of presentation by each. And after that, we will engage in a discussion, and we will have about 45 minutes for discussion. So we should be done by 4 p.m. Portugal time, more or less. Please don't hesitate to send your questions in the chat. So after that, I could take up your questions if you are uncomfortable with speaking up. So let me first present Ulrich. Ulrich is the director of the Clinical Legal Education Program of the International University College of Turin, where he's also a faculty member. Ulrich, it's a pleasure to welcome you in this context. We have met a few years ago in a conference of the European Network of Clinical Legal Education, and it's always rewarding to see how such encounters can lead to further collaborations such as today's webinar. Ulrich, the online air, if not the physical floor, is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Veronica, and thank you very much for all the organizers and the law clinic in Lisbon to get us all together on this topic, which obviously I was immediately very interested because obviously this is a hot topic for all of us when we start talking about our experience in the last it's more than a year already. I have prepared a small PowerPoint presentation which I can share hopefully. It seems to work. Can you see it? Okay.
Yes, we can see it.
So I hope I will be very concise, or I think I will just touch upon some of the aspects that I found interesting. And then obviously, please stop me and we can then maybe push some of the questions maybe to the discussions afterwards. First of all, quick context to Italy, which is not a full context, obviously, but in this year, a number of issues arised which affected somehow our work, but also which is basically somehow a non-changed situation. Although the pandemic, we had a really increasing number of people arriving again on the Italian coasts by sea, but in particular also many arrived from the land borders. So with a number of violations also taking place and questions about let's say the treatment of those arriving. Veronica talked about these quarantine vessels, for example, or pushbacks on the land borders, for example, on the Balkan routes. There are a number of issues that arise during the pandemic in particular. This has not lifted in any way and even increased, obviously, the crisis on access to justice for specifically migrants and asylum seekers in Italy. What is also was much more even a problem was the lack of a critical approach to the current legal system on migration and asylum. This is something which I think before was already a big problem, but specifically with the pandemic, it seems that a lot of these kind of items of legal rules become something very how to put it politely, somehow strange, let's say, to see how rules are applied to, in particular, also in the migration and in the asylum field. In addition to it, there is, in my view, a continuous and even increased crisis on legal education, especially during this kind of online teaching period, where we all can question ourselves on the effectiveness of teaching. A lot of teaching has taken place through just online recording of, or some video recording of a talk or of a presentation. If this is teaching, then we have to think about what we really would like to transmit to our students. And in particular in this time, and that's I heard a lot from, and this was beforehand, before the pandemic already, something very important. There was an increased demand by students for practice, looking on the law in practice, and in particular in these times of pandemic, obviously, students were thirsty to get engaged in real activities. Then to some extent that helped, at least from my point of view, from our experience, our clinic to be a bit more focused, sometimes even sometimes more engagement, although a lot of those activities have been taken on even online. So this is just the context I wanted to give you quickly. Obviously, there's much to be added, but I wanted to show you how we translated this context into our practice somehow. Maybe just one thing that I wanted to share with you is the thought of Frank Bloch, which continues to be a very relevant citation, which always is very important to recall ourselves, and specifically in this specific problematic times, that our goal must be to transform legal education into justice education and training lawyers for social justice, which was, I think, potentially very complex in these moments of pandemic. Quick spot on our law clinic. We have a law clinic on human rights and migration law issues, which is a sort of joint venture by the Department of Laws of the University of Turin and of the University of Eastern Piedmont in Alexandria, and the International University College. As you can see from this strange map, but you can see we had in the last years over 300 students from more than 50 countries, which makes this experience for students, because they're coming from from the three institutions, so from Italian public universities, but also from the international master that we offer at the International University College. And the fact that we had always present in Turin, even during the pandemic, people where we have had to be present in Turin, students from all over the world, even this year, for example, helped us to give a specific feature to the clinic, which is also a sort of interconnection between cultures and experiences already inside in the student's body. We were able in 2020, 2021 to perform these kind of activities. So we had the ongoing activity on Refugee Law Clinic, where we provide legal services to asylum seekers and refugees. So this is more an individual support for asylum seekers and refugees in their asylum process. We also work on in the Against Human Trafficking Law Clinic with providing support to victims of human trafficking. Both of those activities, which is more a classical individual legal advice clinic to individual persons, beneficiaries, clients. We have been able to continue to perform these clinics even during the pandemic, which was interesting to see, and this is something which I was very proud of, that students were very engaged in finding solutions to meet the clients either over WhatsApp calls or some Zoom calls or kind of online calls, which obviously was not the same as you would invite them into a physical interview or client service consultations, but still it was possible to support them. This was in the very beginning last year when we started this kind of online. This was really in the month of March to let's say May, June. But very quickly we realized that actually the context of migrants and their problematics are such that it is not changed at all. Migrants moved around during the year as they moved beforehand. They got on specific spots, like I will show you in a second, like for example in agriculture areas close to Turin, in Saluzzo, for example. So we thought, okay, if this is the situation, we need to find a way to provide services. And given the pandemic, and at least in June last year, got a bit of a relief in the summer period, we started to go again in person to provide legal service in person. And this, for example, was translated in the Refugee Law Clinic in a cooperation with the info point of Saluzzo Migrante, which provided an info point which was specifically setting for social distancing with all the hygiene implementations inside. And students and volunteers of the clinic could actually provide selected cases that came from the info point to the law clinic, to the clients that came to the clinic or to the info point, which is interesting. This is a photo from last year. As you can see, even if we talk about the pandemic, well, maybe specifically because we're talking about the pandemic times, Saluzzo has decided not to open up a shelter place. The last years, we always had a very dense shelter place opened up with the support of the municipality, which was always a sort of gathered point of hundreds of people inside or in one military base. The year of the pandemic, they decided not to open up this space because of the problem of distancing, etc. And that caused a lot of problems for the migrant workers that were to work on the agriculture area, which opened up the big issue of how's it called? Sleeping on streets and so on and so on. So this showed that the necessity of services, and I'm not talking about only legal service, but services to provide to migrants were as great and even some enhanced even in some places in particular. I'm quickly showing you some other activities we did, which I think was also interesting to see how the pandemic helped us maybe to enhance some more specific cooperation, which we otherwise wouldn't had so easily. We worked in our Against Human Trafficking Law Clinic, which you can see beforehand was in person, then we had it very much in these online settings. But what came out was we had started a cooperation, a very interesting cooperation with the Migration and Traffic Persons Law Clinic in University of Abuja, and base University of Abuja in Nigeria. This is a very new law clinic working in this area of migration and trafficking. And we got to know on one of those law clinic conferences with the Global Alliance for Justice Education conference in 2019. And actually we started to cooperate. And this is very interesting because we do provide service to victims of human trafficking in Turin, in particular, which are all Nigerian women. And the last 5 years, we always had Nigerian women that we supported. And so working on the Italian side with Nigerian women and seeing a Nigerian law clinic working on the same issue and trying to cooperate and to understand maybe the issue from both sides is a very enriching activity. So we meet periodically now online with the clinic, sometimes with this problem of seeing, just as you see in the photo, just the boxes of the students because the Wi-Fi is not always working very well. But still, it is a very enriching process. We open up a sort of Slack group that works quite efficiently to engage students between them. So if questions arise in our legal services, for example, they can contact also law clinic students in Nigeria to ask some specific context question to Nigeria. And we helped the law clinic in Nigeria to enhance the information that they would provide for their awareness raising program that they opened up in Nigeria. So this is a very interesting example of how the pandemic, to some extent, also gives some possibilities of growth. Another interesting, and this is maybe more linked to, this is always linked for the emergency somehow that emerged last year in our strategic litigation activity. And I think Francesca will certainly also talk about some of this part. Obviously, the strategic litigation activity was already something which was possible to do online somehow, because you could connect in meetings through Zoom meetings, because you usually work more on a desk case. You receive information and you work on the case like in third-party interventions. And we had been engaged in a very interesting cooperation with the Migration Law Clinic in Amsterdam, working together with students on both sides and also with students of Palermo on a third-party intervention on the hotspot in Lampedusa. This year, we have been involved in a very interesting case to the Court of Justice, where we produced a expert opinion to Sea-Watch in their problematic they experienced together with a number of other search and rescue operations programs. Boats that all been detained in Italy last year for this so-called port state control issue. And so we produce with our students a sort of search and expert opinion to the Court of Justice case that has been filed on this issue. This was a very interesting, exciting, let's say, legal problematic, which although touches upon a very sad issue that basically last year all those vessels have been detained by Italy and couldn't serve search and rescue activities. Yeah, last point I want to make, and then I'm closing, is we since very long time, very beginning of the clinic, we actually work on the immigration detention and have a research project on this. And last year, we used the pandemic somehow as a tool to understand what actually happening in the removal detention centers in Italy, and not only in Italy, but also in other countries like in the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Spain, Sweden, the UK. Which was a very interesting work to compare the different situations. And as you may know, it's a removal detention center. So, but if there is no prospect to remove a person due to the pandemic, usually you should get away from detention. Basically, there is no ground for detention anymore. And only country that actually liberated all those people in detention centers were Spain. In our research, all the others kept people inside. UK slightly had a half of these the detainees have been liberated in this period of pandemic. But especially on Italy, it was very striking to see that actually even the detention center has been enhanced instead of releasing has been taking place. So this was an interesting comparative work that has been done by the clinical staff. So I'm just concluding saying pandemic opened up a lot of challenges, specifically going in touch with the legal problematics that occurs that are to some extent even multiplied in different areas. And it was very challenging to teach and get in contact with students, and having these students, let's say, enhancement well supported during the clinical program. But at the same time, I think it opened up for a number of very interesting possibilities to engage and cooperate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. I think it's a very interesting conclusion that you arrive at, this idea of both facing challenges, but also turning this around, right? Turning the pandemic around to open up possibilities. So now we'll move forward to our next presenter, who is Francesca Bionde Dal Monte, who is an assistant professor at the Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna and of Pisa, and also a coordinator of the DREAM research project, data research and analysis on migration. So Francesca, the air is yours.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Thank you for this kind invitation and the opportunity to share with you comments, experience of our legal clinics in time of pandemic. I would like to share with you my presentation. So, sorry. Okay. I hope you can see the presentation. It's okay. Thank you so much. Okay. So I would like to start from the question that you have mentioned in the abstract of this interesting event about migration, clinical legal education and research in pandemic times. And in my presentation, I would like to mainly focus on three questions. How did migration, clinical, legal education and research change with the pandemic? And I would like to focus on two experiences of the Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna in the framework of the Immigration and Asylum Legal Clinic and the Legal Clinic Against the Labor Exploitation and Trafficking in Human Beings launched in the framework of a specific project last year. Then I would like to focus on the new activities developed during the pandemic in order to also overcome some difficulties that we had during this period, and I will try to draft to indicate some preliminary conclusion about the role, the activities of Legal Clinic after and in the meantime after the pandemic times. And then I will focus on some points, some challenges for Legal Clinic in general in this new migration context in Europe after this critical period. First point, our activities and the difficulties that we had during this period. Our first immigration and asylum legal clinic was launched in 2019 thanks to the collaboration with the specialized section on immigration, international protection and free movement of citizens of the European Union of the Court of Florence. Thanks to this cooperation, we elaborated some research activities related to the cases pending before the Court of Florence, for example, related to the humanitarian protection in the framework of the Italian national legislation and the application of this type of protection in the Italian courts. And another interesting activities was the elaboration of 3 country of origin reports about South Nigeria, Pakistan and Ghana. All these activities were carried on by the students of the Legal Clinic. And another interesting activities, the main activities, is the elaboration of reports of the cases pending before the court related to the recognition of international protection. Students work with the judges in charge of these cases, and they elaborate a description of the cases, the analysis of the territorial commission denial. The commission is the first body that decide on the asylum application. They also do an in-depth analysis of the case law related to the case. They also collect country of origin information related to the country of the asylum applicants, and they also cooperate to the elaboration of the question for the hearing of the asylum seekers before the court. So it is a very interesting activities that allows students to have an inside view of the cases related to the international protection in Italy. They also have the possibility to understand the way in which judge assess the credibility of an asylum seekers, and also they have the possibility to apply the international law, EU law and national legislation to a specific case. So it is a very interesting example of law in action, that it is a sort of objective of our Legal Clinic, the main objective of our Legal Clinic. Other activities of the Scuola Sant'Anna in the past years was the legal clinic against labor exploitation and trafficking in human beings. This clinic was launched in 2020 in the framework of a specific project called the METRA, funded in the framework of the AMIF Fund, Migration, Asylum and Integration Funds, and in cooperation with other national partners, among which ASGI, under the coordination of the Coldiretti Toscana. The main activities of this legal clinic are the analysis of the legislative framework related to labor exploitation and trafficking during a preliminary part of lectures, and then analysis of cases related to labor exploitation and trafficking in human beings, and thanks to the cooperation with lawyers in the framework of the network ASGI, these students have the possibility also to participate in interviews with victims of labor exploitation and trafficking in human beings, and also they have the possibility to elaborate, to participate in the drafting of acts and reports about cases. What were the main difficulties during the pandemic for these type of activities? First of all, as you may know, the access to the courts was limited during this critical period for judges, lawyers, and people in general. Judges work remotely, so smart working was activated, and also the so-called processo civile telematico, an online form of proceeding. Many legal deadline was postponed, and at the beginning we had the suspension of hearings, and in the following months distant hearings through a video conferencing system implemented by the Ministry of Justice, especially through Teams. This situation leads to the suspension of the activity of the legal clinic with the Court of Florence. So unfortunately, in the last year, it was impossible for us and for the students to join to support judges in the Court of Florence in cases related to international protection orders. And during this pandemic, as you know, also the access to university was limited for professors and also students. Regarding research activities, we have activated smart working, and for teaching activities, online lecture through WebEx, Teams, Zoom, and so on. So we tried to organize all our activities of the two legal clinic online, with organizing online session with the students. But at the same time, for the immigration and asylum legal clinic, we also try to move to another type of activities in order to overcome the suspension of the activities with the Court of Florence, the temporary suspension of these activities. And as Ulrich have already mentioned, we participated in the elaboration of two third-party interventions before the European Court of Human Rights, presented last November 2020, together with another legal clinic, Coesione e Diritto of the University of Casania. These two cases were related to the detention of migrants in the hotspot of Lampedusa, and students had the possibility to analyze the legislation and the case law about the detention of migrants and the consistency of the Italian legislation to the European Court of Human Rights obligations. At the same time, we also develop new type of activities related to, for example, the cooperation with Save the Children, implemented from the beginning of this year, 2021, in relation to regarding cases about the protection of migrant children. So we organized online activities, regularly meeting with lawyers, and we analyzed some cases related protection of migrant children, the access to asylum, and also family reunification of children with their parents, and so on. And then from May 2021, so last month, we restarted also the activity with the Court of Florence. So we have also this type of activity, and students come back to the Court of Florence in order to develop also the activity, the support to judges. Regarding the legal clinic against labor exploitation and trafficking in human beings, we had more difficulties in online teaching activities because the legal clinic was focused on working group and analysis of cases, and it is not always simple to organize this type of activities in online format. And also we had some difficulties in organizing interviews with the victim of labor exploitation and trafficking in human beings during this period. So we try to overcome this difficulty with a close cooperation with ASGI and with the lawyer of this association, Italian Association of Lawyers working in the field of migration and asylum, organizing online working session also for small groups in order to share views, analyze cases, and from September 2021, so next September, the teaching activity will continue in presence. So some preliminary conclusion about this period in order to answer to your interesting question, how were the new challenges addressed and what conclusion do we draw from this? My first preliminary comments view is that digital activities for legal clinic cannot replace in-presence activities. So we have to combine these two types of activities in order to meet the objective of a legal clinic based on law in action. But at the same time, the new challenges arise from the pandemic stimulate also new form of cooperation with other legal clinics. For example, as for the Italian cases, also in the framework of a specific national coordination of a legal clinic, so-called Coordinamento Nazionale delle Cliniche Legali, and also in the framework of another network called ADIM, focus on immigration and asylum issues, and with a specific group related to training and legal cleaning activities. So cooperation and at the same time new type of activities. As for the Scuola Sant'Anna experience, we developed third-party intervention before the European Court of Human Rights, and it was the first time for our legal clinic for this type of activities. And at the same time, the cooperation with Save the Children and the new path, a new area of research, analysis, and implementation of law related to the migrant children's rights. For the future, in my experience, we have to we could take advantage from the online activities and the use of platform, for example, for cooperation with other legal clinics also abroad, together with the in-presence activities. And also we could combine different types of activities in order to exchange view and offer to our students a wide view of immigration and asylum challenges. So last point, very last point, the changing migration context in Europe. Considering how Legal Clinic can cope with this changing migration context, I list some main point of this changing context. The first is the ensure the access to asylum procedure and the protection of asylum seekers. Due to the COVID-19 outbreak and the introduction of movement restriction and border closure in Europe, some countries have applied certain administrative measures which resulted in a drop in the number of asylum applications in 2020. So we have a reduction of more than 30% of the asylum applicants compared to 2019. As you can see here in this table, according to data of Eurostat. So we have to monitor this situation and also to assist or to support asylum seekers in their application, and to work also for safe routes to European Union. Another important topic is the detention of migrants during this pandemic period, as already mentioned also by Veronica at the beginning. The use, for example, of quarantine ship, Navi Quarantena, for example, in the Italian experience. So we have to carefully analyze the condition of migrants in this type of boat, and the consistency of this presence of the migrants with the obligation of the European Court of Human Rights, especially Article 5 of the Convention. Other challenges that we have to deeply analyze is the cases of illegal repatriations, and in particular the migration routes to European Union, focusing on the Balkan route, the condition of migrants during this through this route especially, as well as the condition of migrants in hotspot, not only in Italy but also in Greece and especially in the island. So we have to assess, to evaluate the situation of migrants and the access to asylum procedure, and also the application of Dublin regulation, especially for the family reunification of asylum seekers to other parents and relatives in other European member states. The pandemic crisis has also increased the poverty, and another important challenge is the child poverty. This is important according also to some interesting report of Save the Children, for example, and also in the framework of the recent European Child Guarantee. So we have to monitor also the access to basic rights, the prevention of discrimination of migrants in access to social services, and in general also to health services. And last point, the pandemic crisis has also increased the unemployment of all people, also obviously migrants, and there are other important challenges concern the renewal of resident permit and the possibility to stay on the territory of the European member states. So these are new challenges for the legal cleaning, together with traditional area of activities. So we have many points in which we can work in the future for our legal clinic. Many thanks for your attention. Here you can find my references, and I'm very happy to participate in the debate after this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Francesca. That was great and interesting, and I think that we can see some points in common already with Ulrich's presentation, this idea of still having some new possibilities like collaboration with other clinics. I think it's an important point. So now we'll move forward to Bastien Charouteau's presentation, who is a PhD candidate at Sciences Po Law School and a teaching assistant at the Sciences Po Migration Clinic. Bastien, it's great to welcome you here. So the air is yours.
Thanks, Veronica. Yeah, let me just start by saying that I really appreciate this opportunity to share what we've experienced this year with other legal clinics, and that as a general comment, the Sciences Po Legal Clinic is very eager to develop new partnerships on specific projects with other European clinics. So I hope that we'll have the opportunity to discuss that at some point or in another occasion. I'll start by, I don't have a beautiful slides like you, but I'll have my face. I'll start with a brief presentation of the Sciences Po Legal Clinic, then a presentation of its migration program, which is the point of our conversation, and then I'll share a few considerations about the COVID-19 crisis. The Sciences Po Law School Clinic started 10 years ago. We created it as an experiential learning program built around a contextual, interdisciplinary, and reflective approach to the contemporary practice of law. It enables our students and partner organizations to engage in public interest and social innovation projects at the local, national, and global scale. The clinic's pedagogical and public interest mission relies on the active involvement of faculty, students, and partner organizations in projects relating to current social justice issues. What I mean here is that we are not an in-house clinic, which means that we do rely on partner organizations to provide legal advice and produce any other kind of legal work. So we have specific projects, we work by project, we have programs and then projects, and the projects have all a partner organization, whether it's a firm, a law firm, or an NGO. The clinic itself is divided into 5 programs. The first one is access to justice. Second is corporate social responsibility. Third is human rights in the context of economic globalization and development. Fourth is migrations. And fifth is environmental justice and ecological transition. I'm specifying this because some of the projects of the migration program are transversal to other programs of the clinic, such as the human rights and globalization or access to justice. Sorry. Now to the migration program itself, which was created 7 years ago, so it's just a bit younger than our clinic. It involves students from the law school, but also students from the School of International Affairs, which corresponds to the interdisciplinary dimension of the clinic. And research is an integral part of the migration clinic. What we strive to do is to link research interest and methodology with clinical practices when we devise the projects. The objective here is to influence public debate within and beyond academic circles through the publication of reports, academic scholarship, as well as public events organized at Sciences Po. So we have frequently, for example, professors from the faculty or doctoral candidates designing projects, trying to find a way to connect their research interests and new epistemological ways of doing research with practical stakes that are shared with NGOs or firms or law firms, which is, to be honest, not that easy, but it's an interesting enterprise. The interdisciplinary and research aspect leads us to engage not only with legal assistance of disenfranchised populations, but also, and almost most importantly, in advocacy work and analytical reports in partnership with a variety of NGOs and law firms. So generally, students work in teams. They are allocated a project. Within that project, they have a report to write or an advocacy work to do. And they also work with the organization on the ground. And that's where there's a bit of legal assistance. That would be, well, legal assistance to asylum seekers or refugees. But then they always have to kind of take a step back and try to reflect on their own activity with the partner organization and write their either advocacy work or analytical report. To give you an idea, this year we had 5 projects. I think I can share my screen and do something like that. And like this. You should be able to see the screen, I guess. Just so that you can have the project. So that's, yeah, it's the website of the clinic. So the first project that we had this year was about transit zones and detention rather than confinement, actually, at the external borders of the air external borders of the Schengen area. So that would be international airports. The idea behind the project was to produce a comparative analysis of detention, refusal of entry and detention at international airports all over Europe, selecting a few countries. We started with France, Belgium, and Spain, and actually we were not able to do that. So what we did is an analysis of EU law first, to be able next year to have a team working on the margin of the states in the implementation of EU law in different international airports. So the idea is to look at the legal norms, EU law, but also national law, and especially detention at international airports is not, it is kind of regulated by EU law when it concerns asylum seekers, but not when it concerns, non-asylum seekers. So there's a large margin here for comparison. So first, analysis of legal norms, analysis of legal practice, and analysis and comparison of the different NGO strategies against either detention or removal. The second project was an ethnographical work aimed at analyzing the jurisdictional protection of migrants in the practice of French courts. So this one was a bit, honestly hampered by the crisis, because as Francesca said, I think it was the same in France. Most of the, some of the trials were postponed, and most of them were online. They were remote. So the students were they were supposed to observe the processes from within, and they were not able to do that, but they were able to connect to the remote trials. So it was interesting to see how they could observe what was made remotely. The third project was on the impediments to migrants' mobility on the Balkan route, and especially on the case of the Croatian-Slovenian border and chain pushbacks. Again here, and I'm mixing the project with already the consequences of the COVID-19 crisis. The team of students were supposed to do fieldwork investigation at the border in Slovenia and at the border between Croatia and Slovenia. They were not able to do so because of the COVID-19 restrictions and restrictions to border crossing. but still they were able to get in touch with NGOs on the ground remotely and write their report with Migre Europe. Fourth project was on access to healthcare for Georgian asylum seekers in France. So the objective was to build an argument based on the health infrastructures in Georgia to promote access to health for Georgian nationals through asylum in France. Here again, the students were supposed to do a field investigation in Georgia in order to be able to assess with experts on the ground the health infrastructures. And again, they were not able to do the trip, but they kind of prepared everything, and we're going to do this next year, you know, if possible. Fifth project was about accompanying third parties to the French Office for the Protection of Refugees and Stateless Persons, the OFPRA, which is which implements the asylum procedure in France. So there was a recent legal reform in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, which allows for third parties from a limited selection of NGOs to accompany asylum seekers during their interview. And the aim of the project was aimed at analyzing the impact of the reform and elaborating ways to improve support to asylum seekers from NGOs, from these third parties, and maximize this opportunity. The project actually led to, well, its continuation. Next year, we're going to do the same project, and a new project of creating an online platform for all the NGOs, because we were working only with one of the NGOs habilitated to accompany asylum seekers, and they just kind of synthesizing strategies and knowledge about how the interviews are carried out, and what we can do, what third parties can do to help asylum seekers. Now, there is one project that we really devised to try to answer in our own way to the COVID-19 pandemic, which we devised at the end of last year. So it was kind of during the first confinements and the COVID-19 crisis. We devised it last year for this year, the year that just passed. It was a project to create an online clinic crafted as a platform of legal information related to COVID-19. It took time, so it's almost ready now. I'm going to show you a few prototypes of the website. So we designed the project with the program Access to Justice, with the aim to provide reliable legal support through both an online resource with thematic sheets and FAQs, and a contact form to request an interview. This year, the students mostly dealt with preparing the infrastructure of the website, ensuring compliance with personal data regulations, ensuring compliance with the regulations on legal counsel, because in France, lawyers, les avocats, have a monopoly actually on legal advice. So we had to make sure that we could give legal advice without infringing on these regulations. And they also devised some of the thematic sheets, and they gathered some of the information. The platform, as you'll see, is on many issues, not only migration, actually. It's on labor law, healthcare.
Sorry, Bastian, sorry for interrupting you, but I don't think that we see the platform that you're talking about.
Yeah, you're not. It's where
did you want to show it to us, or just to make sure that
yeah,
everything is as you planned? No, it's not. I was just wondering. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so the themes are here. Public liberties in times of sanitary state of emergency. So those are some of the resources, and this is a prototype. It's going to be improved in the coming month, but it's just to give you an idea. And it's quite ambitious, actually. Yeah, we'll see what we can do. access to justice, labor law, public economic law, so including help to small firms, migration law and international mobility, and discrimination. And so it's gonna look like this. That would be the main page, I imagine. So where it's called Droit en ligne, and yeah, there'll be an English and a French version. This is the English version. So you have the presentation of the platform, what is Droit en ligne, what you can do through the website, which is aimed at facilitating access to reliable legal information and complements student training through practice. For now, we have the ability to answer to requests in 9 languages. How does it work? So first, inform yourself with the useful resources, which are here. And if you don't find your answers, you can fill out the form to request an appointment. The students and faculty will study your file. If we are skilled to answer to the question, we'll set a remote appointment and have an interview. So this website is going to be online in a few days. We're going to test it within Sciences Po first. So the idea is to just open it to basically researchers, professors, employees, and mostly students from Sciences Po, especially on the migration part and discrimination, try to have them see how, what kind of questions they have relating to border crossings and how they can get to Sciences Po, et cetera. Because we got 40% of the Sciences Po students come from abroad. And hopefully, the idea would be to expand the platform and the legal advice to more precarious kinds of migration, so to speak. I'm going to stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bastien. I think it's an interesting idea, the online clinic. I think it's something that we could potentially all think about. So we're going to move to our next presenter, last but definitely not least, Emmeline, who is a PhD candidate at Nova School of Law, and she's the executive coordinator of the Nova Refugee Clinic. So she's basically the heart of the Nova Refugee Clinic. Emmeline, the air is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor, for the introduction. Thank you also for all speakers. It was really interesting to see your law clinics. I would like just to share a small presentation, also to be easier to present it. So, what I'm in charge today is to present the Nova Refugee Clinic, the legal clinic. So let's start with our objectives. So the Nova Refugee Legal Clinic is the legal clinic of the Nova School of Law and the Research Center on Law and Society. It was created with the aim to develop research in the field of asylum law, to monitor and evaluate existing legal and policy response in this area, but also to propose and to recommend changes in developments of the mechanism to ensure adequate legislation and public policies to protect and to respect the rights of applicants and beneficiaries of international protection in Portugal. Regarding our mission, actually our mission is the same of the university missions. So it's teaching using the method of learning by doing. So we have students and also PhD researchers that teach, and between them and among them, they can exchange knowledge. Research, in that case, trying to merge the law in the books, the theory, with the law in practice, and also the third university mission, which is the contribution to the society. And here we'd like to achieve the social and economic impact. I would like just to develop a little bit more about the third mission, which is the social impact. It's empowering people, especially asylum seekers and beneficiaries of international protection, regarding knowledge and understanding of the social rights, specifically because we worked a lot with social rights in the last year, but also in economic impact regarding the labor rights that they have and how they can work, especially during the pandemic. Let me just show you a kind of background of the creation of the Nova Refugee Legal Clinic. Actually, the idea of Nova Refugee Clinic started in 2017. I wrote a project and presented to Professor Francisco Pereira Coutinho. And at that time, we would like to propose a project to the AMIF, the Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund. Unfortunately, we didn't had any success in this finding. However, the idea remained, and Professor Coutinho presented the idea in 2019 to the rectory of the Nova University of Lisbon, and this idea was received very well. And together with the National School of Public Health, we started and we elaborated the pilot project for 1 year of the Nova Refugee Clinic. So in 2020, last year, you actually launched the legal clinic, but all alone, because unfortunately the National School of Public Health of the Nova University of Lisbon was kind of blocked due to the coronavirus. So all the research that they could develop last year, it was redirected to the coronavirus research. So we launched the legal clinic. Let's just understand how the legal clinic is actually structured. So the Nova Refugee Clinic, it's an idea that actually is in the research center of the Nova University of Lisbon. The main idea is that any school could have its own clinic and develop research and provide some services to the community. We are the legal clinic that is located in Nova School of Law and also belongs to the Research Center on Law and Society, which is our research center in the Nova School of Law. So we actually started in January 2020 when we launched a call for members, and at that time we had 10 students from the PhD and master programs that joined the Nova Refugee Clinic. At that time also Professor Ana Rita Gil joined the coordination, and in the beginning we had 3 coordinators and 10 students. Our first kickoff meeting was in the 3rd of March. But 15 days after, the 18th March 2020, it was declared in Portugal the state of emergency. So actually, we had to re-elaborate the all pilot project, because we had wrote a project that you could interact in person and directly to the asylum seekers and refugees, and also could visit and go to the institutions that are in the field. But with the pandemic and the state of emergency and actually the lockdown, we could not do it. So what you did, we divided the group in 2 big groups. One of them, it's the practice group that provides information and guidance for applicants and beneficiaries of international protection. And this was done remotely, so mainly by email. In the first year, during 2020, we could provide social support during the lockdown, especially and mainly with the registration of asylum seeker children in the Portuguese public schools. And actually, this was one of the main points of our intervention, because in the beginning, the foreigners, especially those who didn't have a residence permit in Portugal, they had to go to the schools where the all range of papers and documentation to register their children. And actually, from one day to another, everything started to be online. And the most part of those children, due to the lockdown also, they didn't have the residence permit or even all the documents that were needed to register themselves in the schools. So we tried to help them from the simple thing like understand which school, which group of schools that in Portuguese we call agrupamentos, they could apply for, and also to explain the rights to education that they had. Also, the access to healthcare, specifically also the registration in the health centers, and access to social benefits during the lockdown. Also, we helped with information on the family reunification, mainly on the right to family reunification, and we explain and clarify how the procedure to request family reunification in Portugal really happens, occurs. We also helped with the labor market issue, explaining how the asylum seekers and refugees could access the labor market in Portugal and how could they access the professional training courses during the lockdown. That was also a difficult thing because we were also learning how the new things happened, and we tried to translate to English and sometimes to other languages to explain how the things were working during the lockdown in Portugal. The second big group was the research group that carried out research and reporting on asylum, but also on other humanitarian migration issues. So in 2020, this group could provide some information to help and to reinforce the asylum requests regarding the country of origin information. So in order to support the asylum requests, so helping people to prove that they came from places that they could be persecuted. Also, we helped with a kind of opinion that we wrote on the detention of asylum seekers. That opinion was based on a request from an NGO that would like to understand how the Portuguese government, specifically the Portuguese migration police, were doing with the new arrivals that happened in the southeast of Portugal. So normally arrivals from Morocco to the south of Portugal. And also, we wrote an opinion on the responsibility of Portugal during a specific pushback that happened to Libya on the Maltese sea waters. So this is what we did during the year 2020. However, we also had the opportunity to learn with the lockdown, and in November 2020 we had new faces and new ideas. So the coordination team received Professor Veronica Corredel and João Marques de Azevedo. So we grew up during November 2020, but also new researchers. So the practice group changed a little bit, but the research team also grew during the November 2020. Actually, what we did, we divided the research group in 7 lines of research, each one with its own team leader. So right now we have the line on migration and sexual orientation, migration and the state punitive power, migration and the law of the sea, migration and armed conflict, migration and development, migration and gender, and migration and work. During the year 2020, we also had the opportunity to have some partnerships and collaboration with other university and research centers, for example, in some projects, some ideas, but mainly in conferences, seminars, and also capacity building courses with public organizations who had meetings. And actually right now we also were integrated in the municipal plan, so the City Council of Lisbon integrated our project in the plan for integration of migrants in Lisbon, and with some international organizations. For example, we had meetings with the UNHCR in Portugal in order to see the possibility to have protocols and some partnership, but also and mainly with NGOs and associations that really work together with the opinions that we wrote with them, but also with the capacity building training courses that you did during the year 2020. So this is the main idea that I would like to present to you regarding Nova Refugee Clinic. As you saw, we started our activities only in the beginning of 2020, so we have a little bit more than 1 year of activities, but we are quite with huge expectations for 21-21. We expect that this year we can start also the in-person the presence assistance, and maybe passing the most part of the informal partnership and collaboration that you have right now for to a formal collaboration and partnerships. So I'm looking forward your questions and comments, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Emmeline. So I'll open the floor to discussion. I have myself a few questions, but I want to first give the opportunity to anyone who wants to ask any questions, even including the presenters, if they want to relate to each other's presentations in any way. That's very much welcome. So yeah, I'm just gonna, you can raise your hand or just straight away speak up and unmute yourself. Or if you don't have any questions for now, I can jump in and ask a few questions as you wish, but I want to give you the priority. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead. So I just have first a question to Ulrich, and perhaps a comment or some clarified issue that I have in my head for Francesca and Bastian as well. Ulrich, I really think that this collaboration that you came out with the Nigerian clinic is really interesting in the sense that it's a moment of encounter with a different kind of perspective with people that you were working in Turin, but in a different. So they are, they're working they've been working in the Nigerian clinic in a different, let's say, stage of the same sort of problem. And I'm really curious to know what you have learned from this experience, like in what way has this experience changed your clinical practices? Personally, I think I really believe in this kind of encounters because I think that it's a moment in which that requires that is facilitates a lot a self-reflexivity towards what we're doing, because we are seeing another perspective in relation to something that an activity that you have in common. Perhaps it's not exactly the same because we are talking about sort of a different stage of the same issue, right? In Nigeria and in Turin, we might be talking about people that would, the same people, but in this context, they might be facing different issues as well, right? So yeah, I was just wondering if you could say a few words on that. I think it's also, it makes us think about the opportunities of the pandemic that the pandemic offers us, like, because I think that previously we weren't thinking about the collaboration of clinics in Africa, in places that were so far. Suddenly this digitalization of activities sort of makes us think about these places as not that far anymore, because we have this possibility of interacting. Personally, I think that this is really a great great opportunity that that can be offered to us by this shift. So yeah, I will just let you respond if you want.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, first of all, I think it has. So we're in the start of the cooperation. We had different meetings already together, basically starting from July last year until now. Last meeting that we had was just some days ago, last week, where we always exchange students' perspectives and students' work that they do, etc. So this. But still, I think I feel the necessity to say that it's still a growing sort of progress of cooperation. We now think about letting the students maybe organize a seminar on this experience, which hopefully is something that the students found interesting and maybe would like to take on. We will see if this is developing. We will send an email if this is happening, because I think it would be quite interesting to hear. But let me say that two layers, in my view, which are very interesting in this cooperation. First is the layer for the students. Here, I think it is from an Italian perspective, although we always had also African students, for example, from our international master joining this part of the activity of the clinic. So it was already sort of cultural matching and discussions ongoing. So it was not only Italian students, but still it was always seen as sort of Nigeria being the country producing a lot of victims kind of impression, right? Now seeing and interacting with law students from Nigeria working on the same problematic and the same social problematic to some extent, and seeing there's no top-down sort of reflection, but there's a horizontal reflection on the same issue, is something very healthy for the Italian students, because or for our students somehow to see that actually, we're not talking about a small, poor African country to support somehow. We're talking about a equal problematic that we have to tackle from both sides. So I think this was very helpful from this perspective, and I think for the students in Nigeria, it is really wealthy to see that and to learn about the problematic, because it is something which is a bit under the carpet. So if I can say so, in migration and trafficking, although now I think there is a very huge success on the Netflix Nigerian series that has increased in awareness about the problematic. But a part of this is an issue which, for example, in universities is rarely existing. So starting a clinic in this area is also a good sign, because a lot of more awareness is taking place in this area of reflecting research and academic production. And of course, of new lawyers being able to understand what the phenomenon is, and obviously hearing from the stories that we can tell from the Italian side, it's for the students in Nigeria quite a healthy and very interesting process. So this is very interesting. What I found is also interesting that there is a lot of power dynamics taking place in this relationship, especially Europe pushing a lot of Nigerian government to implement some support mechanism, but which in practice turning out to be detention centers for victims, returned victims of human trafficking coming from an asylum system in Italy, for example, returned to Nigeria. And obviously, if you learn about this from the Italian perspective or European perspective, you can say, okay, that's a clear problem of returning these kind of victims to Nigeria. But it's also interesting for the Nigerian system to understand this power dynamics from Europe somehow pushing with a lot of money and seeing that the state organizations, NAPTIP, called trying to support victims of human trafficking, it's turning to be something very ambiguous in terms of really supporting the victims of human trafficking. So that's obviously the clinic working on this issue means that also there is knowledge about this. There is something, a knowledge production about this, and hopefully also an awareness raising about the transparency about these problematics. So I see it's really, I mean, this will grow hopefully, and we are certainly going on. And which I found interesting is that there's really we created a literature platform together. We created this Slack group together, so students can actually interconnect, asking questions directly without going through us. And this is it's something really interesting and quite useful, I guess. Maybe one thing just to make a small advertisement, if something. This kind of collaboration have really been able, like we have met in the European Network for Clinical Education conferences, but there are this Global Alliance for Justice Education conference. We are just organizing a new edition online, which will take place in 2 weeks. These are really interesting places to meet other people from different countries. And you can see actually that clinical legal education in Europe is something very small compared to South Africa and Nigeria, or places like Indonesia, India, where clinical legal education has taken place and developed quite strikingly since over years already. So learning from these examples, but also taking the opportunity to collaborate with other clinics is actually a huge possibility that Gage as a Global Alliance of Justice Education or networks like ENCLE are providing. So I invite everyone to take part in those conferences, because these are really good tools to connect with others.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. I will definitely join the conference in 2 weeks. Yeah. So then I had another, I guess, just a question more to Francesca, but because I put your presentation together with Bastien, then this question came out, which is the concerns the access to courts, right? So it's like you said that this project of with students helping judges, it was actually completely suspended. But it wasn't in the case of Bastien. I think that you told us that students still sort of followed the court proceedings online because, well, they shifted online, right? So so I just was wondering if, like, why. So did this sort of blockage in your context, Francesca, a blockage of this project of supporting judges, did that come from judges themselves? Like, was it, and do you think that this is, I mean, if they continued the proceedings online, like why did they stop it? Did they use actually the, I don't know, the pandemic as an excuse more to just like interrupt the collaboration, or it's just, I mean, I don't know, but it's just a question that sort of popped up in my mind.
Thank you for this question. It was a decision based on security reason, because working in court and also supporting judges in hearings involving asylum seekers could be not safe in the sense that during these hearings, in general, usually there is a lawyer, an interpreter, the asylum seekers, maybe other people supporting the judges. So it's not very easy to organize this type of activities in a crucial period, in a critical period, as especially last year. And the many judges in courts, especially in the north of Italy, were suffered from coronavirus because it was quite unexpected in this dissemination, the spreading of the virus, especially in the north, in Milan and in other courts. So the first part of our activities in the second semester was affected by this critical situation, and we had to organize a new type of activities, maybe participate in remote and in online hearing could be a possibility, but at the same time, I speaking with the judges, I understood that many hearing was postponed at the same time, so there was not only urgent matters was scheduled in online format, and at the same time also using Teams with all the privacy protection and other type of access for student was not simple for us. At the same time, also the university decided to suspend all the training and activity abroad for security reason, and also unfortunately also some students were affected, were suffered from coronavirus during from March to June 2020. So the best decision was to suspend in-presence activities and move to online activities, and according also to the preferences of the students and the opportunity also to work on a different issues, we decided to work on the two third-party intervention before the European Court of Human Rights. Some of the students that last year didn't have the opportunity to work judges in the court of Florence now are working with judges, so we try to organize the activities for this semester, and also judges are really available and happy to start again this cooperation that for our university is really important and useful for the training of our students.
Okay, thank you very much, Francesca. So I will call again the public for questions. Again, you can write the questions directly in the chat, or just raise your hand, or simply just unmute yourself and speak up. I think we can do this also informally.
If the professor allowed me, I would like just to say something. If you would like to write down in Portuguese, we can translate it. So if you don't feel like comfortable to write down in English, you can translate the questions. Thank you.
Yes, I can. I'm happy to see in the public, in the audience, some of my students of public international law. So I just wanted to reassure you that you can ask any questions, and there are no wrong questions. Yeah, well, but if there are no questions, I'm going to ask another question. So and I'm gonna take something that Ulrich said, and I think that it's really important, this idea of like linking the clinics with critical thinking, right? So Ulrich was saying that an issue is the lack of critique of the legal system that is sort of very much ingrained in our legal education. So the legal clinics would come to sort of actually bring something more critical through this learning by doing orientation. And I think that this is extremely important. And I would just open the floor to for others to share their own experience with this idea of critical thinking and how legal clinics actually can bring something critical to the way in which legal systems are being taught in in general. So Ulrich, perhaps you can sort of because you mentioned this, maybe you can start and share with us, give us a bit more context on, or more on what you think about this, and then perhaps also others can join for this question.
Yeah, very quickly, so that others can also talk about these issues. Yeah, I think on the pandemic somehow is also a very interesting moment where critical thinking can actually happening. Let's say where we and migration to some extent has been always perceived in a sort of crisis mode. The same can now be seen for this health crisis. So we have in addition this kind of health crisis and all this kind of economic, health, refugee, whatever you crisis you talk about. These crises affect somehow how knowledge is produced and how actually legal rules are created, specifically in this sort of emergency situations. We have seen this so strikingly this year. We have, I think, overcome so many different paradigms that we thought that these are kind of set in stone, and we actually have been overcoming those kind of paradigms very easily. And I think this is striking to see. But in these times, I think that it is very crucial that we really start reflecting about how knowledge and is produced and how it is actually rules are created, and this is very critical. And here legal clinics can produce something very interesting, because instead of having a professor or researcher looking at the issue as such, a bit from the interest of the person or the interest that he or she perceives in the legal reality, the legal clinic produces a different version or vision of the law in action. Here, there's not the lawyer as such, or let's say the researcher as such looking at an issue. It is someone bringing the legal issue to the researcher. So it is sort of shifting the vision and the and this is very interesting, because I think from the legal clinics, and if you take those cases and you start reflection, like Bastien said, the Sciences Po clinic is working somehow now, taking it from practice and starting reflecting about it. I think that's exactly what a legal clinic can actually shift the sort of perception. And here, the critical reflection about the law and practice can actually help also producing a new way of thinking about the legal order that we are living in. But I think from this perspective, I like to take the law clinic experience in terms of critical thinking.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. Bastien, perhaps you want to be the next? I know that Sciences Po has also a very strong critical tradition in general in legal, in teaching, so even outside clinical legal education. So I think it's also an interesting perspective that you might have, because like critical thinking is already integrated in other in education, even outside clinical education. So how does that work?
Yeah, it's thank you. It's a huge piece. I would say, yeah, Sciences Po Law School was kind of, well, its scientific identity is to gather lawyers and researchers who think about the law from a critical perspective and from a general interdisciplinary perspective. So it doesn't have a field per se. identity is not to be specialized in labor law or whatever, or international law. It's just critiques of the law, and there are many ways of critiquing law and education in law. I would say yeah, that's really how we envision the clinic. And I would say that students in the clinic learn critical thinking, critical practice of the law through at least 3 dimensions. One is again, a word that means everything and nothing, interdisciplinary aspect of the clinic. But it does make a difference, I think, to have various programs, master programs involving the legal clinic and not only lawyers. So in a project, you'll have student lawyers from the law school, and you have students who are, from the School of International Affairs or the School of Urban Planning or other schools. And so you have students with different perspective in the same team and on the same project. So but the object is legal, right? Those are legal. It's a legal clinic, but we have students that are not all lawyers. And so that's the first aspect of learning critically about the law, having one's peers thinking differently about an issue. The second aspect I imagine would be the confrontation with activism, and especially in our migration clinic. I was going to say most, but actually all the projects are in partnerships with NGOs that are rather critical of droit des étrangers, immigration law, and that really are engaged in contesting the legal norms and their application. So there's they've been learning human rights, fundamental rights, the law in book, as we like to call it. And then by being an activist for an NGO, they also learn law in action, which is at the base of the clinical education. And they realize the gaps not only between law and its application, but also they realize how the law is at the heart of power relations, right? And how the law is, it's always the same thing, but both an instrument of power and of subjugation and an instrument of emancipation, how you can use the law. So it's really kind of a really, I would say, concrete and a realistic vision of law. It's not all bad or all good. There's no idealization of law. It's okay. So we have this situation with foreigners, especially with foreigners, because immigration law is mostly devised to enable the state to exclude foreigners, but there's also a set of fundamental rights. And so they really experience the ambivalence of the law. So that would be the second aspect of critical education through the clinic, which would be activism. And the third aspect that we try to have here would be the input of faculty researchers and doctoral students who are the tutors of the students. And so that's another layer of critique, which would be, okay, now you've seen the ambivalence of the law, you've experienced what it is to be an activist and what it is to use the law for a common goal. Now try to take a step back and think about what you've been doing and what the NGO has been doing and what it means for an NGO to use the law that way, and how the NGO kind of sets itself in a power relation, and how it's a question of interpretation, etc., etc. So that would be the last layer of critique, which would be a meta-analysis of the social usage of law that NGOs don't provide themselves. They wouldn't, well, it depends on the NGO, but they wouldn't necessarily admit that. They wouldn't have a discourse about, it's a basic legal argument, right? The NGO would say, this is the way to interpret the norm, and the state, well, no, the way to interpret the norm and to apply the norm is that way. And then you take a step back and you think about what's happening here in this controversy, and how the NGO, what kind of argumentation ideals, conceptions, values is the NGO using here to kind of shape the law in its own interest, which is a public interest, but still. So that would be the last layer of clinical education that I guess we're trying to have here.
Very interesting. Thank you, Bastian. I really think it's interesting, this idea of like experiencing the ambivalence of law. I find something very interesting in this. Francesca and Emmeline, I mean, if you want to say also something in relation to that, would be great.
Yes. If I can, I agree with what already said by Bastian and also Ulrich. In my experience, also from the perspective of the Sant'Anna Legal Clinic, I found particularly interesting the interdisciplinary view and approach that stimulate also the critical thinking. We have students from law, from the law sector, but also from the political science and social science, and the cooperation between different perspectives and also methodology could increase also the critical thinking, the critical point of view, and the exchange of view and comments about current legislation and policies. Another interesting point, I think, is that we have to apply law to specific cases, and at the same time, also from the perspective of the Italian legal order, we also have to assess and to evaluate if the law is consistent with the Constitution, and also this stimulate a sort of critical thinking, in the sense that sometimes also law or at secondary level, also administrative acts, for example, could be not consistent with law or with the Italian Constitution. So we have our activities could improve and could deal with a critical thinking also for the analysis more in general of the legislation and the policies at national, regional or local level, and especially, for example, in the welfare sector and in the access to social services, we had many policies, many laws that introduced a condition that affect mainly the condition of migrants, and they deal with the social exclusion of migrants. So the critical thinking could help us in analyzing law and not applying always the law if the law is not consistent with the Italian Constitution, and but also principle coming from international convention and so on. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesca. Emmeline, you want to?
Yes, just also a few words. Thank you. Also, I think, as the others said, we have also different backgrounds in the Nova Refugee Clinic, the legal clinic. On the one side, it's because our master students and PhD students, they don't have to have a law degree to apply for a master or a PhD, for our master and PhD programs. So actually, we have people who are doing the master's degree, but they are from philosophy, for example, or from journalism. So actually, even if they are students from the law school, the background could be the most several and diversificate. And also regarding the critical thinking, the tutors, as Bastian said, I think they are really important in this phase when you are trying to create and elaborate research from a different perspective. And actually, our lines of research, we have, for example, PhD people who had already the PhD degree, who works together and alongside with bachelor's students. So we can balance and actually know altogether. And in the last year, 2020, also it was quite of interesting because for one side, Portugal was known due to these kind of regularization programs, and everybody was talking about, oh, but that's gorgeous, that's fantastic, you are the example. But on the other hand, we had many problems with the integration procedure in Portugal. And actually, you had a case with asylum seekers in a hostel, and there were more than 100 asylum seekers there, and one of them was infected with COVID-19, and because of it, they were transferred to a military installment. It was a kind of case, and at that moment, we were able to analyze this case regarding the material conditions that the asylum seekers has as right, and also this kind of publicity that you have regarding the way that Portugal received people. And it was interesting because in the bachelor's degree, we don't have this analysis that deep as we could do during the research that we develop in the Novel Refugee Clinic. So I think that critical thinking, working together with NGOs and migration and also refugee associations here in Portugal, it's another way to develop also migration research in Portugal. And actually, as you saw, we had to pass for 3 years to start the Nova Refugee Clinic, at least in Lisbon, at Nova School of Law. But I think that this could develop a good critical thinking, and I do hope that we can also collaborate and exchange experiences during the next years. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmeline, and thank you, everybody. I think we can conclude on an interesting note, because I think that critical thinking is crucial when it comes to clinical legal education. I think it's a one platform among many others that facilitates critical thinking, and also it's not just about critical thinking, but also it's getting closer to the realities that surround us and understand them in better ways, and hopefully also think about our roles in society and how we can contribute to improving the conditions of migrants or the society overall. So on this note, I would like to conclude this event, and I would like to thank you sincerely for your presentations and collaboration. And I really hope that this is just the beginning of further discussions and collaborations in the future. So once again, thank you, and I wish you all the best.
Thank
you,
you,
Veronica. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you all.
Bye. Thank you.